Hello, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear my mic okay. I don't know, Luigi, if you can confirm.
Yes.
So wait just 1 minute to give time for people to join in. I see people are still joining in. So people have time to finish their lunch. Okay, I think we can slowly start. All right, let's go. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session on third-party conformity under the Cyber Resilience Act. And this is a session that we thought toward the let's say an audience of smaller market operators. We try to go a bit beyond the so-called usual suspect, the stakeholders that we meet all the time when it comes to the CRA debate. So who am I? My name is Matteo. I work for the European Cybersecurity Organization. For the last year and a half, I had the pleasure and the fun of working within the CRA implementation. My organization is part of CYBERSTAND, which is a dev project, funded by the EU and whose goal is to support the drafting of EU harmonized standard, as well as being a supporting tool to create awareness around CRA implementation. Today on the call, I have with me Angel Moreno Rubio, Digital Policy Manager at the TIC Council. Now, the TIC Council represents the testing, inspection, and certification industry. So you will understand that this is quite crucial for us when it comes to the implementation of CRA, because many of the organizations that are represented by the TIC Council will be most likely, or at least they will apply to be accredited to perform third-party conformity. So they will become so-called notified bodies able to perform third-party conformity. So we're very happy that Angel was able to join us today to provide that perspective. Also, working in cybersecurity community, I've been in touch with Angel for the last few months. We've been discussing a lot around these topics and other cybersecurity related. I just wanted to mention that Angel joined what we call the standardization communities within CyberSTAN. In that regard, you can also join them. They're free to join and depends really to what extent you want to contribute. And later in this webinar, I will paste the link in the chat. To give you the context of this webinar today, discussed internally, but also externally, I would say, we had the feeling that debate was around Cyber Resilience Act was a bit polarized between two groups. And maybe you have the same experience. On the one hand, you get highly familiar stakeholders that know all the nitty-gritty details of the law and discuss very specific issues. On the other hand, you have other stakeholders that barely know what the law is about, what are its provisions and its scope, and so on. Turn out that both groups are part of the EU digital market and will be needed for the implementation of the law. So we believe that bridging these sort of gaps can help support an even implementation of the Cyber Resilience Act. CyberSTAN, therefore, is working in this direction with a series of sessions like the one we're having today, where we try to break down the Cyber Resilience Act into small topics, and we try to give you a sort of getting started, very high-level introduction session, as we said, where we like to target small market operator. We would love to record all this session and bring them on the CyberSTAN website so that you can listen them later on. And this brings me to today's topic. While many manufacturers, particularly small manufacturers, might not have previously undergone a third-party conformity assessment, this might change depending on the product category that your product falls in or the risk assessment you perform. And this might change, as I was saying, under the Cyber Resilience Act. Bottom line is that under the Cyber Resilience Act, at some point you might want to or you might have to perform a third-party conformity assessment. So this session is intended for market operators, especially SMEs. They would like to get started in understanding overall what is a third-party conformity assessment, how does it work, where do I get started, and possibly also when Angel will share his contact, also who do I reach out to get started. As a disclaimer, as we said, this is a high-level introduction session. We're not trying to solve or discuss what routing you need to take when it comes to conformity assessment. We're really trying to give you an idea of the what is a conformity assessment in itself. So we will see more or less what is the TIC Council, explain a bit about the third-party conformity, why you might need this under the CRA, and also, if we have time, also discuss a little bit how standards are relevant for this. As you know, well, we've been said quite a lot in the previous month, harmonized standards are not only useful for manufacturer, but there will be a reference also that will be used by the bodies that perform conformity, third-party conformity assessment, but also market authorities. So with all that, I hope I didn't repeat myself or you haven't heard this thing already too many times. I would like to give the floor to Angel to bring us through the session and then maybe stay with us for a Q&A later.
Thank you, Matteo. Can you hear me well? Can you see the screen? Okay, perfect. Thank you for the kind introduction and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a nice lunch. So my name is Angel Moreno Rubio. As Matteo mentioned, I work for TIC Council, where I'm the digital policy manager. And today we'll talk about a topic which at times can be a bit too technical, a bit complicated with some terms that can be similar to each other. So my goal today will be to bring a bit more of clarity on what conformity assessments are, third-party conformity assessment in particular, and everything in the context of the Cyber Resilience Act. Just as a disclaimer, everything that I say here and the presentation is just for informative purposes to have an exchange of views to show you our view on the topic and have a conversation, but nothing can be considered as legal advice, please. So note this, and then of course I'll be happy to connect with you personally offline. So let me see if I can go to the next slide. Yes, the agenda has been introduced already by Matteo, so I'll give you an overview of who we are, what we do at TIC Council, who we represent, so that you can have a better idea of ourselves, and then we'll delve into the topic of what are third-party conformity assessments in the context of the CRA, and then finalize with how the role that standards play in this context, and then we'll have, I believe, some minutes for a Q&A. So about TIC Council, we are the international trade association representing the testing, inspection, and certification industry worldwide. We have over 100 members, I think like 115 members across over 160 countries. So we really represent the sector worldwide. We are headquarters TIC Council in Brussels, but we have also offices in Washington, D.C., in Shanghai, and in New Delhi. So we are really an international association representing the whole sector. So basically, our members are TIC companies in the testing, inspection, certification sector, and together we have our organization called TIC Council, whose main strategic objectives are advocacy, reputation, and best practices. Of course, at trade associations here in Brussels and elsewhere, we advocate for our industry. We try to engage with stakeholders so that they can understand better what's the role of the TIC sector, how we can help, and so on. And of course, this is really linked with reputation. And also, last but not least, we always have an important part of our work is around best practices, not trying to align more the industry and how we do things, to improve together and share know-how and experiences. So as I said, I am digital policy manager, so I cover mostly cyber and AI topics. However, TIC Council, we do represent the industry across different sectors, being the cybersecurity, AI, product safety and compliance, but also sustainability, international trade, and others. So we really represent the whole industry across different policy areas. Having said this, a brief presentation about TIC Council, I wanted to tell you a bit more as an introduction before we get into the topic, what's the role of the TIC sector when it comes to cybersecurity. So of course, our members, they play a very important role through their testing methods and evaluation of different gadgets, industrial services, and more on evaluating, mitigating, and addressing different cyber risks. So we help have a more cyber resilient ecosystem thanks to the work done by our members. Of course, and most interestingly, perhaps for this session, we also support manufacturers in complying with cybersecurity legislation via third-party conformity assessment. We'll touch in a minute, but we also play an important role with manufacturers from a voluntarily base. They want to ensure the products or services are safe, so they can go to a TIC company to make sure on this. So this is our two-hatted, no? So one more on the voluntarily basis and one more related to compliance and legislation. So these are really our two main roles when it comes to cybersecurity. But then, of course, in order to test emerging technologies, cybersecurity and AI, we need our members have invested a lot in terms of knowledge and the skills of our experts, but also infrastructure that allow us to test test software, which basically has different characteristics, of course, than physical products. So this is something that we have a lot of know-how, and of course, as TIC Council, as an association, our goal is to collaborate with stakeholders on the one hand to ensure that we get the implementation right of the existing EU cybersecurity legislation, like for example the Cyber Resilience Act. Here I want to mention, for example, that together with Mateo and EXO, we've had different what we call CRA dialogues, where we exchange views and we discuss different challenges from a TIC perspective, from manufacturer's perspective. But then on the other hand, of course, we are willing and we are there ready to provide our expertise and guidance in helping shape future EU initiatives, being legislative or non-legislative. And you can find more information on this in the website. So getting directly into the topic. So I titled this slide The Basics because these three terms that you see in the slide, I will refer to them quite sometimes in the presentation. And it's very, very important that you get them right, because if you already understand these three terms, I think you have half of the way done in terms of understanding third-party conformity assessment. So before I go to the third-party part of the equation, let's focus on what conformity assessment is. Here I have included a reference to two legislations, one of them being the Cyber Resilience Act. First of all, a conformity assessment according to Regulation 765 of 2008, which basically is a regulation that outlines rules for accreditation and market surveillance authorities. It is a process in which we demonstrate, so demonstrate is an important part of the definition here, whether specified requirements related to a product, process, service, system, or even a person have been fulfilled. So it's about demonstrating that something, that an object, that a product, that a service meets requirements. In the context of the Cyber Resilience Act, here we can read process of verifying whether the essential cybersecurity requirements in Annex 1 have been fulfilled. So conformity assessment in the context of the CRA refers of fulfilling the requirements that are in Annex 1 of the CRA, all that list that you have. Then, when we understand what our conformity assessment, that again basically is about checking, verifying, demonstrating that a requirement has been fulfilled, we have conformity assessment bodies, what we also know as CABs, CAB, the acronym. CABs, according again to the Regulation 765 of 2008, is a body, an organization that performs conformity assessment services, including calibration, testing, certification, and inspection. So here you can see that in a different order, we have the TIC acronym, so testing, inspection, and certification. So what I want to say with this is that all TIC Council members are conformity assessment bodies. That is how they are known under EU legislation. So TIC Council members, also known as CABs, they are the ones who perform conformity assessment service that I explained a bit earlier. So now moving to the third key definition that I want you to understand is notified body. And here I've used the definition of the Cyber Resilience Act, which says a conformity assessment body is designated, so important word here is designated, in accordance with Article 43 and other relevant EU harmonization legislation. So in a nutshell, to become a notified body, a CAP needs to apply, let's say in quotation marks, to get designated. This designation in which they, let's say, authorize a CAP to act as a notified body is done by the competent national authority of member states. And it's a body that is really, really important when it comes to fulfilling the requirements and the compliance of certain product categories within the CRA that we'll see in a minute. Maybe just as a last remark on this, I would strongly suggest if you ever have any doubts about definitions or how the system works overall, I think it's very, very important that first of all, you understand that the CRA and any product legislation overall is based on the new legislative framework, the NLF, that was presented in 2008 and is, I think, 2 legislation and 1 decision compose this initiative, let's say, one of them being the Regulation 765 of 2008 that I mentioned, because this is really the basis for any product legislation across the EU. For example, the CRA, but also the AI Act and others. So a lot of valuable information is there. Then also, I would strongly recommend to have a look at the Blue Guide that was presented in 2022, which somehow supports the NLF and goes a bit beyond in explaining the role of standards, of conformity assessment bodies, and other things. So these 2 documents or set of documents are very, very important on all the issues I'm discussing. So if you ever have a question, please do consult them. So having said this, now I have explained what's conformity assessment. So now let's get into what makes it third, first, or second party. So to start with, first party conformity assessment, the main difference here is the who carries out the conformity assessment, being the verification that certain requirements in EU legislation have been fulfilled. In the case of first party, this conformity assessment is performed directly by the organization that provides, that has developed the object. When I say object, I refer to a product, to a service, to a system, can be tangible or intangible. So it's the manufacturer itself who demonstrates that certain requirements have been met. Usually, first party, which is also known as self-assessment, is used when the product has a low degree of risk. This risk can be towards people, towards society, towards businesses. So the level of risk of this given product is low compared with others. And also the risk of non-compliance is also low, or at least lower than in other category of products. So this is really the first conformity assessment process, first party, sorry. And then we have a second party conformity assessment, which is a bit tricky and it can be misleading. I know which really lies between first and third, but nonetheless, I wanted to include it here because it exists as an option. So in this case, the who performs the conformity assessment is a party that has an interest in the object of conformity. For example, is a buyer, is a user association, is a customer contracted tester. So there is somehow a link between the organization who develops the product or the service and the one who tests it, but they are not the same one. So there is a slight difference, but they are interconnected somehow. And of course, this kind of conformity assessment gives a bit more of objectivity while not being 100% because there are some links between both organizations here. And last, and perhaps most important for this webinar, is the third-party conformity assessment. Here, the WHO is an independent external body which has no commercial interest in the object that is being tested or the service whatsoever. And here, again, these independent and external bodies would be what we know in the EU as CAPs, conformity assessment bodies, which are represented by TIC Council. So our members are CAPs. Here, again, the CAPs have been accredited or formally designated bodies to perform this kind of inspection, of testing. Why? Because we need to make sure that the CAPs, that the ones that do the third-party conformity assessment, they are not only independent from the manufacturer or from the organization that produces a product, but also that they have the necessarily competences, skills, infrastructure to perform whatever tests or to evaluate whatever standard is needed. Of course, it will depend on the sector. And here, most importantly, to say is that usually a third-party conformity assessment is mandatory or is preferred when a given product or service is meant to be of high risk. No? So compared with others, it's the opposite of first-party conformity assessment, and also there is a higher risk from products or services of not being compliant. So really, this is in a nutshell the three different conformity assessments that we have that exist in the EU context. And then just to provide a bit more of overview of how a third-party conformity assessment would work in practice. Of course, this is an oversimplification, as I didn't want to make things too complicated and keep things really high level. But of course, in the first step, the lab, and I say the labs is like a cybersecurity lab in the case of the CRA. So the lab receives the samples that are going to be tested, or in case of software, are sent from the manufacturer, and then the lab will also review documentation. This documentation can include information about how the product has been developed, the technical documentation, and so on. So there is a lot of paperwork in these exchanges between the lab and the manufacturer. And then at the second step, the lab would conduct a testing against standards. Here I have highlighted in bold standards because they are very, very important. I will touch on this topic in a few minutes. And then, of course, in the last step, the lab will produce a test report and send it to the manufacturer with a pass or fail result, no? Which will determine if you get the conformity assessment or not, if you fulfill all the requirements that are in the legislation and then the standard. But I think I'm going too fast on that. So now I will focus on specifically the Cyber Resilience Act and the different conformity assessment procedures we have in the CRA. First of all, you can find all information in Article 32 and in Annex 8. These two are key to understand how conformity assessment function under the CRA. Just in a nutshell, we have, let's say, there are 4 options, okay? But if you want to divide it as explained before in first party conformity assessment or third party conformity assessment, then there are only these 2. The first one on the left of your screens, you have internal control procedure, which basically would mean a first party conformity assessment by which a manufacturer can self-assess that it has met the different requirements of the CRA. In this case, for self-assessment, there is no need to involve a third party, meaning a notified body, but we also have different options, different conformity assessment procedures, which do foresee the inclusion of a notified body, thus being third-party conformity assessment. I will not want to go too in depth on these different modules that you see here, but basically there are 3 main options. That is, first, the EU type examination together with an internal production control, which is known as Module B+C. Then another option is the full quality assurance, which is also known as Module 8. And then lastly, if the Commission considers appropriate, there might be the possibility to comply by using EU cybersecurity certification schemes like EUCC or others that might be developed in the future. And then, of course, once the conformity assessment has been done and hopefully in a successful way, you will need a series of documents not to demonstrate conformity and then be able to affix the CE marking, so the standard ensures that products meet with the legislative compliance requirements. First of all, the declaration of conformity, the technical documentation, and in the case of the CRA, also the information and instruction for the users. I just want to say really briefly here, because maybe there are some questions on this already. I don't know. I see that there are some questions, but in terms of I'm a manufacturer, which conformity assessment procedures should I use? This is really a decision of the manufacturer based on your product, and we will come to that in the next slide, but also the risk assessment that you do on your product will really determine which conformity assessment procedure you should come. But in essence, there are two. There is one self-assessment, and then there are third-party conformity assessment, which is divided into three different ones, if you want to see it this way. So, and again, this is what I just mentioned, the product categorization. This is quite relevant because, and again, as I said before, depending on the level of how risky a product is, you will have more first-party conformity assessment or more third-party conformity assessment. And this risk-based approach is used in EU across EU legislation, in the Cyber Resilience Act, in the AI Act, and in many, many others product legislation. So in the context of the CRA, we have the default category, which basically are all products that do not fall in the scope of important products with digital elements and critical products with digital elements. These two categories of products, due to their nature of that pose higher risk than the default category, they have strictest cybersecurity requirements, and also, and most importantly, they will need to go through a third-party conformity assessment. So again, using module B+C or 8, or maybe in the future, they can also benefit from EUCC certification, for example. So it's really important for all the manufacturers listening here. If your product falls within one of these categories, you will likely need to undergo a third-party conformity assessment, except in some cases where if there are availability of harmonized standards, you can also do self-assessment. So here you can see the graph that I think was provided by the Commission, the IMAX, in a couple of years ago, in which they calculate that 10% of the products within the scope of the CRA would categorize as critical or critical and important. So this is very important. And then talking about standards that I just mentioned. So in the CRA, in any legislation, you have high-level legislative requirements that you aim to have when applying this specific legislation. However, these high-level requirements are, let's say, translated into actionable, testable technical specifications through the development of standards. Notified bodies, or CAPs, we use standards to demonstrate that a product, a service, whatever we are testing complies with a given EU legislation. And of course, for the Cyber Resilience Act, already many months ago, the Commission sent a draft standardization request, which was accepted by the European Standardization Organization. Just 1 second. Sensenelec and ETSI, but actually Sensenelec is leading in the development of the standards for the Cyber Resilience Act. So the most important thing of this slide is that if there are harmonized standards, manufacturers can benefit from the presumption of conformity. First of all, this presumption of conformity is purely voluntarily. Even if there are harmonized standards, a manufacturer can always go through a third-party conformity assessment procedure, so contact a notified body, because either they don't have the expertise, they are not experienced on how standards work, the infrastructure, the testing capabilities. For whatever reason, they can always go, and again, it's purely a voluntarily option. But manufacturers, if they choose to apply these harmonized standards, they can benefit from the presumption of conformity, that you are in compliance with the requirements of the CRA under Annex 1. So what needs to happen for a standard to be harmonized, in a nutshell, is that the Commission needs to decide to publish this standard developed by Sensenelec in this case to be published in the official journal of the EU. Just as an informative graph, I've added this image from one of the latest presentation of Sensenelec regarding the standardization process. But as you see, it's a lengthy process, but it's really, really important that standards, both if you do it as self-assessment or if you go through a notified body, that we have good standards that help and ease compliance as much as possible. So this was everything I wanted to tell you. Again, in a nutshell and quite high level, you have my contact there, but you can also find me easily in LinkedIn. I'll be happy to solve any questions you might have. Again, as I said, it's a very technical topic, which sometimes can be a bit frustrating or misleading, but believe me, we are here to help. So I'm be happy maybe in the future, Mateo, we want to go through them different modules that perhaps is a bit more technical. I would be happy to invite one of our members, which are technical experts, to explain this. But really, and just to say that I think at the end of the day, if organizations are really actively engaged and care about the cybersecurity of your products, believe me, I think you're in a good position to be compliant with the CRA. And yeah, just to say that. So now happy to answer any questions or does you may have, and thank you very much everyone to listen.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Angel. Before we go to Q&A, first of all, thank you for this presentation. I think it was very comprehensive. As you said, and as someone asking the Q&A, indeed, the process of drafting the harmonized standard is ongoing. It's part of the legislative process. So today we stayed high level. The idea is really that for small market operators that are hearing about the CRA, they're able to at least have some contacts either via CYBERSTAND or the TIC Council, start the process in case you want to learn more. But at least we hope today you get a better idea of what does it mean to go on perform a third-party conformity assessment. It's quite complex in the context of cybersecurity products. And as I said, we didn't focus on any specific standards because, as Angel mentioned, via the CRA standardization request, Sensenelec and ETSI are in the process of writing the horizontal and vertical standard that will be used for presumption of conformity. So, but as Angel said, I'm repeating myself, but if you're already applying some cybersecurity standard, you already have some cybersecurity practices, you're probably already in practice have some of the procedures in place. Before maybe, I don't know, Luigi, we could open the floor or maybe check if people raise their hands. I just wanted to make a final comment because I saw someone asking a very complex questions in the chat. But let me just say that indeed there's if we go into complexities of software product, you might have a component that is certified with the third-party conformity assessment, and then it will be a component used in a product that is self-assessed, right? What do you do then? Let me just say that, and by the way, with EXO, we had a dialogue going on with TIC Council, but with EXO, we're also writing and working on a specific guidance on this, on approach that we call composition. Just to make it clear, if you fundamentally we want to support someone who has to do, for instance, a self-assessment, but has a component that is assessed via third-party conformity, help them, facilitating this process. When you produce a document, an outcome of such conformity process, it could be useful to have already some services, some lines that you can reuse as an integrator of that product. But again, this is, I think, a bit of a complex, I wouldn't say a niche case because it's not niche, but it's a bit complex. But I expect to hear more from us about this because indeed it is a hot topic, especially from EXO, but we'll definitely reuse this also within CyberSTAND.